Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Creative Life with Kelssweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today we are going over my March wrap-up. I had to think because it's crazy to me that March is over. As I'm filming this, it's literally a couple of days before I film this, it's April 1st. And the fact, I was about to say March TBR, March came and went, y'all. Oh my god. All right, well, regardless, today we're covering my March wrap-up. It was, I think overall, it was a good, like, reading month as far as content-wise is concerned. Like, the books that I read were all really good. I just hit, like, a weird, I don't even want to call it a slump, but it was just a weird week where I was just like, I don't want to read. I don't have the energy to read. I don't want to read. And I think that I would have finished my March TBR had I not had that week. But also I think there were a couple of other things working against me. So let's get into my wrap up. I'll talk a little bit to you about the weird, I just think all of my reading months have just been weird this year for some reason. Let's get into the video. Like I said in the intro, March was, I think content-wise, it was a good reading month. I read a lot of great books in my opinion. Even the books that I wasn't like, oh, that was amazing, were still good. I'm just like, could have been better type of thing. So I think that that was the main issue, if there was really any issue, or why I felt like it was a weird month. The other thing is too is that I think it was like close to the end of March, like the third week of March, I slowed down completely. I think I didn't read for a whole week. I don't know what happened. I think maybe it was a combination of just being tired and working and all of these things that all together kind of just ended up with me just not reading. And I've learned that about myself, especially this year, that when I don't want to read, if I force myself to read, the book one is not good. I'm not having a good time. I read so slow. And sometimes when I'm in those moments, I just want to listen to music. When I'm working, when I just want to watch YouTube videos, reading audiobook, any of that, it just won't work for me, and I can't force myself to do it. So I think that slowed down my reading. I think that I could have really finished my March TBR had I not had that week where I was a little bit weird, because I think that I had an audiobook that I didn't finish, and I started a physical read and then ended up not finishing it. And I think that that would have been the week that I probably would have knocked out both. So it happens, but again, like I said last month when I found out, I don't like witches. I don't like puritanical witches no matter what. I've now learned that when I hit a week where it's just like I'm overwhelmed or stressed or whatever it is, I cannot force myself to read no matter what, and it will put me in a slump. It will put me in an actual slump, not just a, hey, you just need a little break. Like, I've just seen you too much. I need to, like, have some distance. Let the heart grow fonder type of thing. Let's get into my books that I read this month. It was Women's History Month, and of course that meant that I got to read my favorite trope. I hope that y'all enjoyed the last video that I posted. I really loved doing the monstrous feminine trope and looking at like recommendations to fulfill some of those things, and I still really do want to read the essay. Just until I find a used copy, I really don't want to spend $50-something. No matter how amazing the knowledge in that book may be, $50-something on a single book. Like, I don't even buy hardcovers full price anymore. So to be honest with you, regardless, I really do want to read it one day and look into it more, because I can tell even from my basis knowledge of the monstrous feminine, it is absolutely a trope and a space that my reading, my watching, my content consumption, especially within horror, is based in. Like, I am obsessed with the monstrous feminine, and thank y'all so much for the sweet comments that y'all have left. I hope that y'all enjoyed that video as well. If you haven't gone and watched it, please go do so. It's probably one of my favorite recommendation videos that I've done in a while. I have some more fun, I think that reinvigorated some of my like ideas about recommendation videos. So look out for that this month. This last month, I read nothing but femmes all month, which was so much fun for me, to be honest, and also fun and difficult. Like, it wasn't, of course, it being about femmes, it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard because of all of the shit that just is within being a femme in society and experiencing it, but also the rage and the fun of that rage, I think was really great to read. Also, just to read from so many great femme authors was a fantastic experience. Again, it's one of my favorite tropes. So I started off the month with my book club sweet pick, my sweet read of the month. And that was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. I finally got to this, and I'm glad that we read this during March for Women's History Month rather than having it for May for AAPI month. I just feel like the message of this felt so much more of a women's history month and femme, and oh, there were so many different topics placed in this. I love this. This was a 5-star for me. No, I think I put like a 4 3/4 or whatever, because there was a weird thing that kind of happened at the end that I felt like, I don't know. I think it explained some things, but I don't think it was necessary. I don't know. I don't want to spoil it because I do recommend this book. It's worth all the hype that it's received and everything, but I just don't want to be like telling y'all what happens in the ending or where she ends up. This book, I think I was afraid that since it was already telling us that our main character, Ji-won, was a serial killer, that we would basically already, like, this would just be a voyeurism novel where we were just basically seeing her, like, become unhinged. The amazing thing about it is that it's far more than just her becoming a serial killer. It's talking about how she kind of slowly goes into this insanity, why, and more importantly, her being a serial killer low-key is the least interesting thing about the book somehow. This book covered toxic masculinity in all of its forms, and also toxic femininity in all of its forms. I think Ji-won's mother was so disappointing, not as a written character, but disappointing just as a person. To see someone whose entire existence is based around the idea of being kept or being loved or by a man or seen by a man, so much so that you lose yourself within it, so much so that you don't even care about your own daughters, was really difficult to read about. And it also was very illuminating to the generation before mine. I'm a millennial, just barely made the club, but the Gen X generation before us, who were so focused on that, who weren't a part of the women's lib movement of their mothers, and somehow ended up in this idea that their worth was based on a man's gaze, and brought that. And on the flip side of that, our fathers who were brought up in such toxic masculinity that they can't even treat their own daughters correctly, that they have no way to really raise their own daughters. There is no communication there. And there's a lot of mental warfare that goes on in regards to that. I really love that, because what it ended up being, instead of this book about this girl who's slowly losing her mind and becoming a serial killer, is more so a conversation of feminism and toxic masculinity across generations. And y'all know I love to examine generational trauma. I just really loved how Monica Kim ended up writing about that, and it felt so natural. It felt so relatable, and I really loved it. I had the best time reading this book. It was so good. I would probably put this in the same league as The Women Could Fly, which y'all know was my favorite book of last year, and still is one of my top 5 favorite books. Like, that book made me cry, and I think that if I hadn't read that book already, this book possibly could have been the same sort of experience, to be honest. It really was moving. I think I would recommend this to anybody, but I especially recommend it to the Thought Daughters. And like the femmes who come from households that they're unlearning toxic masculinity from, or gender roles from, or just paving your own way as far as your idea of femininity and womanhood, I really do recommend this novel so much. I honestly, thinking about it, thinking back, the 4.75 was being picky. This is a 5. This is a 5, y'all. I absolutely love this. So, highly recommend. And I'm so happy that everybody else in the book club seemed to have really loved this book this month. There was a lot of great conversation in the book chat for it. If you guys are not a part of the book club, make sure to go in the link down below. We're located on Fable. We are, as I'm recording this, we should have already picked our book for this upcoming month, and it's looking like a landslide on what the next book is. But so make sure that you're click down in the description to join our book club for our April read. I'm really excited for this April read, because it's also going to be something a little bit more, as per usual. You know I love a socio-political read. So this was a really great way to start the month. The next novel that I read, huge mixed feelings. I want to love it. And I think that there were a lot of situations within it that I would have loved, but it just didn't hit the mark, and that was Dearest by Jackie Walters. I saw last year when I did my Sweet Reads Awards challenge, I had asked you all, like, hey, here are some of my top books that are on my TBR currently, which one should I read? And Dearest won for the horror category, I believe. I can see why y'all would have chose this. I think that it was a great novel, and it has to do with the mother trope and the idea of early motherhood and depression and postpartum depression, women losing their minds, childbearing as like a form of a prison. Like, I really loved all those portions of this book. I really loved how much I learned from this book. No one ever talks about how your nipples can get infected while breastfeeding. As somebody who has chosen to be childless, that wasn't like I think that people sometimes think that that's an easy decision for people to make. Most times, more times than not, most people who have decided to be childless, most women who've decided to be childless, have thought about it quite long and hard. And just because I've chosen to be childless doesn't mean that I don't enjoy reading about and learning more about the idea of motherhood and pregnancy and going through those processes, and this, not the pretty stuff that I think society constantly really shoves down everybody's throats. Baby showers and matching outfits and little mini-me's and all this other stuff, but rather like the actual experience of some of those things that are pretty hard. And I think it really rationalizes and humanizes the experience of having a child pushing life into this world. I loved a lot of that in this book. Here's where it lost me, and here's why it's a maybe on the chopping block, possibly when I do my clean out, my unhaul for next year. They had me until like the last quarter, and it went off the rails. The reasoning for the haunting happening in this book made no sense. Like, it didn't make, it felt like a Hail Mary, and it wasn't entertaining the reason for this haunting that was happening. And basically the last quarter is all about like trying to exorcise this haunting out of this woman, out of this house and everything. And because I wasn't on board for why they were being haunted in the first place, the last quarter didn't work for me. I basically put on the boost on the audiobook at 2 times speed just so I could finish this. And I hate that, because the first 3 quarters I was all on board. I loved it. I think it was talking about a lot. I think it was really hard to read about, even past her losing her mind. Her experiences of postpartum depression after giving childbirth were very interesting to read, yet hard. And I was really excited about it. And then I hit that last quarter, and we got some explanations on why things were happening the way they were happening, and they did not make sense. The other thing that I wasn't a huge fan of, her husband sucked, which I get it. Like, in most of these novels, the husband does suck. You know, I may be in the minority, but I would love a women's horror trope at some point, or a book at some point, that doesn't have a male character that sucks. I feel like I read so many of these, and it's just like, the man's the villain. He doesn't understand, period. And while, yes, of course, obviously, I also think that that's not always the case. And I feel like it may even be more entertaining or interesting to maybe read one of these horror books one day and honestly not feel like every man in it is an idiot or horrible. I can't say the same for this, and it got a little bit predictable because of that on how her husband reacted. I was just like, of course he did. Of course he acted that way. I don't know. I know that's a me, kind of low key a me thing. I just feel like the whole, if we're writing a women horror trope or whatever, the man automatically has to be horrible. And it's just kind of like, does every man have to? And it's not this, I don't know. I just think that's a really big absolute, and I don't deal in absolutes. Hey y'all, editing me. I wanted to pop in here real quick because I've had more conversations since I recorded this with other people about this fact, and I thought it was really interesting to maybe add some of this insight into this portion since I don't feel like I really knew how to talk about what I was feeling when I recorded this. So just really quick, a little bit more insight. I really want to make it clear that I understand why the trope of the stupid husband or the husband villain exists in these types of books, because obviously the masculine is at odds with the monstrous feminine in these types of novels because of society and because of the patriarchy and because of just mask folks being unable to understand or relate, or just also being the oppressor of those who are femmes within these novels. Understand that. I am not saying that this trope, that these characters do not need to exist whatsoever. However, as we've learned from me showing all those recommendations in the Monstrous Feminine video that I put out, I read a lot of femme horror. It's one of my favorite genres. I absolutely love it. It is just usually extremely insightful and a good time, to be honest. Now, doing that, this trope is basically just a given. In any sort of femme, I can't remember the last time I read a femme horror where the male character wasn't the villain, wasn't completely stupid, didn't completely abandon ship as soon as the feminine character started to lose their mind or go through something, or just wasn't straight up a villain, to be honest. As somebody who's in a healthy relationship, and as somebody who is also lucky enough to know other women in healthy relationships with men, I know they're very rare, but they are out there. We've snatched some of them up, or have rehabilitated them, I swear. But as somebody who is in a relationship with somebody who, say if I was turning into a werewolf, I truly do believe that my partner would be like, so let's figure this out. I'm scared, I'm concerned, but let's figure this out. If I was possessed, he would probably go out of his way to try and help me out. Unlike in Dearest, where the husband basically was like, out of there. Like, he was, honestly, I was very frustrated with his character because it just felt like out of nowhere, he went from somebody who's extremely caring to somebody who just couldn't handle the heat and got the hell up out of the kitchen immediately. And that felt like a complete character shift for who he was and who he was built up to be the entire book, to be honest, which that's something else I didn't like. But I feel like it's not probable or realistic to only move in absolutes when it comes to any sort of novel dealing with society, because if we were working in that sort of position, then women, what we are constantly asking for as femmes is to be written in a spectrum of different personalities and character types. For us to not do the same for our male counterparts or our masculine counterparts is us basically doing the same problem. And the same thing goes for, like, people who are, like, black characters need to be written across the spectrum and all of that. Like, keep that same energy for all characters involved. And I feel like I would love to read a novel where the male character is actually, even if he's doing things wrong, maybe even being somewhat insightful of the fact of trying to do things right. Or, I'm not saying they need to be perfect, because even that would seem weird or whatever, especially growing up in the toxic masculinity of society that we have. But even having a partner who's just like, I don't know what to do, and but still being there and still trying to, like, at least help the person or our female character or whatever the case is, would at least feel different than anytime I read a femme horror, the male characters, I'm already like, so how are you going to mess up? From the get, I'm just like, you're already either going to be a villain or you're going to get the hell up out of Dodge as soon as things start going left. So which one is it going to be? And I don't like doing that. And I also feel like it completely alienates the masculine and male audience from these books, who I think could learn the most from these books. It's one thing as a woman reading Monstrous Feminine and being like, oh, I relate to this because obviously I'm a woman in this world and I can see where all the metaphors are. Honestly, I'm not the one who needs to hear this. Those who don't understand these concepts need to hear this, and that is mainly men. So if we completely alienate those characters out of these novels, they're already going to go, that's not written for me, because I'm basically being called an idiot straight out the gate. Which you may be, honey. The call may be coming from inside the house. But I still feel like there has to be some sort of attraction, or we completely lose an audience that could learn the most from these novels. I don't know what that looks like, but I do feel like I am tired of basically hearing the same trope over and over and over again, at the very least. Like, I would love to just hear something a little different. That is kind of my thought process and a little bit more insight into what I was trying to get at during that portion that I was frustrated by. And I don't know, maybe other people, I might be in the minority. I know that some people I spoke to kind of feel the same way. I was given a recommendation by a friend who said that, I forget what the name of it is. I'll probably put it down below, because she was saying like her partner in this novel was very much like, he was not perfect. He definitely needed constant, there needed to be like changes and shifts and learning opportunities, but he didn't just bail. And while she was turning into a monster, he did go, well, let's figure it out. Let's try and help you. Let's figure out why you're turning into a monster. Let's figure out if we could change it or whatever. Which I feel like, if not everybody who's in a relationship with somebody who's masked is in a relationship that sucks. I know that some of my lesbian or femme loving followers may be like, girl, you don't know, but but I'm just saying, like, blanket statement wise and everything. I just think it would make for far more introspective novels, and I feel like it would also widen the audience much more if we just made more complex male characters. So yeah, that's my introspection. Let's get back to the video. I know that this is already long enough without me inserting more clips in here. I don't know. This ended up being, I think I ended up giving it a 3. If I gave it lower than that, then I probably was being a little too harsh and was just too upset after finishing the book. But I think maybe it was a 3, like 2 3/4 or something. The last quarter just really was not it for me. And the ending felt weirdly rushed. Like how she ended up being okay by the end, I guess. Or what, it just didn't make sense considering what led up to it. That's all I'll say. I don't think that I would say like don't read this book. I would still recommend it, but I would recommend it like with the addendum of telling somebody, hey, the last quarter, don't think too much of it. But the first 3/4 I think were really interesting, and I would have probably given this a 4 at the very least had that last quarter made more sense to me and been a bit more entertaining. The next book that I read has been on my TBR, but luckily was the read the book club pick for Coffee and Cuentos, who's led by Ashley over on Instagram. She's also on Fable. She usually chooses a shorter story every month, which I really love, and usually for the most part she only chooses books that are from like Latino writers. Mainly, I think it's Latina writers, to be honest. And for this month, she chose Reservoir Bitches, which I was really excited about because she had recommended this book. I'd seen her recommendation some time back and bought the book off of her recommendation. So I was really happy to see, and I had planned to read this for Women's History Month. And so to see that it was the book club pick, I was really excited that I could participate. As I've said before, if you have a book club, more times than not, I'm not going to participate unless I already have the book and it makes sense for my TBR, because it's far too much work for me to try and fit in another book. I cried. I cried. I had to take a pause at the end of this. I'll be putting out a reading vlog where I talk more in depth about this. If I haven't already, I have so many videos going around, so it's either already out or I will be putting it out, where I will go further in depth with this and I talk a little bit more story by story. But I will say I truly, truly recommend this to really anyone. I think it's written very beautifully. I think it's written, I think the thing that I kept on saying was heartbreakingly beautiful is what this book is written. It's very hard to read. I have to admit that it took me a while, regardless of its size. The stories in here are not easy stories. They're not slow stories. They're like 5 or 6. Hell, I think the longest one is at the end, and it's like about 8 pages. But these like storylines are really heartbreaking in the fact that they're all very true. There's no, I think in a couple of them where they're really, really heartbreaking, she kind of delved into the supernatural, but mainly you can tell that that's for the reader's own sanity. And I can appreciate that rather than going, you know, you fabricated those portions or something. I think that she was being very cognizant of the audience who was going to read this, who was mainly going to be women. And as women, a lot of us already know these things are real. These horrible, you know, femicides are real. These murders, these just horrific things that are happening in this book are not based on any fallacy. And since she knew that she wasn't necessarily only educating, she knew that in some of the stories that really were too hard to kind of just go, and she died, this horrible death. Instead, she went, no, she's gonna get she ended up fine, you know, in the long run, or she got her revenge and stuff. And I personally can appreciate that. I know that some people probably won't, but I know that I personally really love that. I also love that there was a story in here that featured an Afro Latina as well, and she talks about it quite openly, which was really great. I think that this covered so many topics, and although it's supposed to be specific to the experiences of femmes living in Mexico, I felt like there were a lot of things in here. While I was learning a lot about that experience, I could also relate to some of those experiences that were happening. The first like story out the gate is about an at-home abortion, and it is hard but also extremely amazing, because I think that, again, a lot of people think that that's an easy decision and that's an easy process, and it's obviously not. But I don't think that it's ever talked about in depth or detail anywhere, whereas this does. And the other thing I think is not spoken about enough is that when people do talk about how hard an abortion is, it's always, I feel like, followed up with conversations of regret. This doesn't do that. It really says this is what this person wanted, and it ended up happening and working, and they were happy and satisfied that it ended up working. And I think that as important as it is to tell people that, yes, sure, there's some people out there who do regret their abortion, I think it's also extremely important to share those stories that people do get them and are extremely happy that they ended up working out the way that they worked out, regardless of the pain. So that's just an example of the very first story. And to be honest with you, I think that that may have been the easiest one to read about, which is crazy to say. But I really recommend it, and I can't thank Ashley enough for recommending this book and having it be a part of their book club, because I feel like no one knows about this book enough. I think that I'm starting to see it make its rounds because of the part of the internet that I'm on. But I feel like so many more people need to be talking about this book. It is so amazing. And again, like I said, heartbreakingly beautiful. I 5 stars. 24/7 5 stars. This was where I slowed down. And I want to blame it on the book. I want to blame it on the idea that that book was just a lot. And so that's why I was just struggling so much. But to be honest with you, I don't think it was that. I think just a lot of stuff started happening that third week of March, and it just slowed me down. And when I'm overwhelmed, I don't want to read. It doesn't help me. I get very anxious about finishing the books that I'm reading. And instead, I go, oh no, I want to listen to music or watch something or whatever. I also, with my birthday coming up, I got into this whole Star Wars binging episode. So books were out of it. However, As long as it took me to read it, I finished it, and that was Girl Interrupted. I know, this small book, but as y'all know, I'm not a physical reader, so it was already going to take me a while, and I'm not a memoir reader. So I was already out the gate going to have some trouble. There was no audiobook for this at all, which is insane to me that there's no audiobook for Girl Interrupted, but I guess. I have a reading vlog that is either coming out or has already come out about talking about this more in depth and how I felt about all of the everything that goes on inside of this. But I will say I've watched the film, love the film. I can't imagine Angelina Jolie as anyone other than Lisa, to be honest with you. And even I forget the actress who plays Polly, but she's Polly in my mind. And of course, like there's just Brittany Murphy's in it. Like that star-studded cast is just amazing. I will say they changed a lot in the movie from the book to sensationalize it a little bit. As I read The Devil in Silver earlier this year, we're going to say. I had mentioned Girl Interrupted as one of those mental health stories that I feel like dabbles more in voyeurism and suffering rather than actual information-based or humanity, in my opinion. And I will have to say that I can blame the movie for that, the book not so much. The movie, I feel like really sensationalizes the whole idea of suffering and mental health care facilities. Girl Interrupted is still a very hard movie for me personally to watch. Whereas I feel like the book was so much more human, and so much more so that I had to keep on reminding myself that the person who's writing this book is a part of a certain generation. There were a couple of passages in here where I was like, okay, let me remember this is a white woman during the 60s writing this book, type of thing. And a lot of that also has to come from the fact that, like, there's no women of color talked about in this book. Even in the movie, Whoopi Goldberg plays Valerie, one of the head nurses on their floor. Valerie in this book is not black. She looks a lot like Lisa. She's thin, she's blonde. They completely changed that character, and I think it was to have these conversations of racism, because it was the 60s, and Susanna Kaysen never touches on it once in this book, which I feel like is very telling, of course. I think the movie was trying to make up for the lost pieces that are in this book, which is the fact that there's not really any intersectionality in this book, which is why I think that I'm rating it closer to, like, and again, I feel weird rating memoirs. I think everybody always says this because how can you rate somebody's story? I mean, I shouldn't have to say this, but I will, just to make sure it's out there. I'm, at the end of the day, anytime I read a memoir, I have some plan for later on this year, I am always rating it based on the impact it had on me, rather than whether or not it was an interesting to read about their life or whatever. More so in relation to me. I hope that, like, that's clear and I don't really have to say it too much again, but I'll probably say it again just to make sure that people know that is what I'm rating at the end of the day. And considering that I will probably be rating this around 3.5, I think that it's still moving, and I think that it's still important. It'll definitely still stay in my library, I know that much. But at the end of the day, this is a very one-sided look at the mental health care system during the 60s for women, because they're all white women. They're all white, rich women. You have to think about where they even are in the first place. McLean Hospital, celebrities go here, so all of the people there have money to go there. They're talking about these situations in regards to mental health care and all of that, but at the end of the day, you guys are one of the Hiltons of mental health hospitals, as opposed to anybody who may not have money, who may be queer, who may be black or a person of color, period, living in the 60s. They're not getting any of this treatment whatsoever. No matter, and it's not to negate the treatment that you may be receiving that was subpar, and at the end of the day was extremely misogynistic, but it is a very one-sided look at that experience. And I think that, the movie tried to introduce more so that it didn't seem so one-sided by having Whoopi Goldberg as a character within the film. But now, having read the book, I feel like that's now forced. I feel like even that dialogue didn't exist and that it was fabricated just because the movie itself was releasing during the 90s and somebody would have said probably the same things I'm saying right now. Again, what I did get from this book that I really really loved and I think was really moving for me personally, a lot of what's in here and in the space that we are right now as a country, as a society, world, a lot of people like to go and put a lot of identity, a lot of men want to put these identity tropes on our grandmothers. Oh, they cooked and cleaned. They were so much more docile. They wanted to have families. They were this, that, and the other, these ideas of femininity that they have. When in all honesty, our grandmothers were simply trying to survive. These were not tropes or conversations of their actual personalities. And at the end of the day, some of those women who were that were simply acting out the roles that they were assigned and had to live out in order to survive. As well as the fact that there weren't things like language around half of the things that, you know, women's lib and liberation and femininity and femme rights and the word femme, you know, in the first place, to be more encompassing of those who are trans. Like, these things did not exist. These conversations didn't exist. They weren't even a possibility. Like, you're basically comparing apples and oranges here. Both fruits, completely different though. Like, it's insane. And when you read this and you think of the fact of like this girl in here and Susanna Kaysen and her being 18 years old and it's 67 and you're hearing her thoughts and like how she got in there and even how some of the other women who are on her floor got in there. I constantly am sitting there and I'm like, had I not been born as a millennial, oh, if I hadn't gotten smart and learned to survive and put on the act that I needed to put on, I was getting sent to somebody's insane asylum for sure. Because really, a lot of these women are in there based on ideas of just nonconformity. While some of them do have mental health issues, they're now things, and I think that we touch on it slightly in here, things like ADHD, OCD, depression, anxiety, like these are all things that people do not get sent to insane asylums, mental health facilities for any longer because they now treat those things. Everyone in the world has ADHD now because we realized, one, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why a lot of people have quote unquote ADHD now. I don't want to just say like, oh, now we have the language to recognize it or whatever, because of course, because of the thing that I'm recording on right now and what you're watching me on right now, phones, computers, shows and stuff, things just kept on getting quicker and quicker. Our attention spans got shorter and shorter, and we have really wired our brains to where they are now. But also things like being on the spectrum for autism. I know so many people who are of the Gen X generation who have realized from their children being diagnosed with autism, realizing that they also live on the spectrum because autism is genetic. And the thing is, as soon as we realize that it is a spectrum and that being neurotypical really isn't typical, the more we also realize that the stereotypes that come with the idea of autism really at the end of the day are stereotypes because you're really just thinking differently. It's not even a lesser life or any of these things. You're literally just thinking differently. And I think that that comes from us having these conversations, us having the language and everything, and also taking these stereotypes off of mental health. In the idea of having anxiety. Almost everybody I know has anxiety. We talk about it now like it's just like, okay, yeah, I know, you're living, so of course you have anxiety. Back in 1967, anxiety? Are you okay? Let me give you a pill for that. Where's your lorazepam? Like, you know, I think that that is probably the thing that moved me and the most about this is, one, thinking of who I am as a woman, where we are as society currently, where we possibly could be going back towards, and also the idea that so many people put these ideals of their own politics on our grandmothers who didn't ask for that, who were women, who had thoughts and feelings and anxieties and depressions and normalcy at the end of the day, as far as just being human and emotional. And I think that that's what this book did most for me. I will say, though, I just felt a little bit one-sided on it because at the end of the day, it really was just summer camp for some of these women. It and it's not to degrade, or I don't mean that in a degradation of what they were going through mentally and what they were experiencing, but I will say that at the end of the day, they had the money to even stay in an institution like this, not go to some state hospital where they were going to be locked up for good. And there's an example in there of a woman who really, really is mentally unwell and is sent to a whole nother floor, and they're shocked when they go down there because they don't realize they're privileged sitting at that floor. And I think that that was a really big conversation on what is always a situation of intersectionality and white women not realizing privilege because they sit at one minority. Those women felt that they had the worst of the worst, and then they went to maximum security, which none of them had ever been to. And they had complained and they had whined about what the nurses were doing and all this other stuff. And they went down there and they were like, we need to leave now. We can't be here. This is where actual crazy people are. And also realizing, yeah, you're sitting in a floor of privilege and in a place of privilege. And while, yes, your privilege may be at a lower like standard to somebody out there in the world right now, outside of those walls, at the end of the day, you're paying for a hotel type experience. If you were poor, you would be in some state hospital and it would be far, far worse. You wouldn't get away with everything that you're getting away with. Hell, even if, who knows if you'd even get sent to a state hospital and not just get sent to jail, you know, if you were black or a person of color or whatever. So again, those are plenty of nuances and conversations that have to be spoken about along with mental health. And I think that The Devil in Silver does a much better job of that. But in the grand scheme of talking about her experience, in the grand scheme of when this was published, all of that, I think that, of course, this is a hugely triumphant book. And especially how short it is. I really, really loved the pacing of the chapters. It took me a while to read this just because reading a memoir, I can't zip through it because it's not to be zipped through, in my opinion, because it's somebody's life. Those are my thoughts. I somehow was like, oh, I'll talk more about it in my reading vlog. Read my reading vlog. I somehow talk far more in depth about like quotes and stuff and everything in the reading vlog. So make sure you watch the reading vlog if you want to hear more thoughts on that. But of course, I had plenty of thoughts about this one being a memoir. My next book I didn't finish. That was Sugar by Mia Ballard. I started reading this. I got maybe 30 pages in. From the start, we're moving into murder. It's murder from the get-go. It's more flowery writing than I usually am used to. I will say that. I definitely want to read this book. I'm not turned off by it in any sort of way. I think that it's just the fact that I'm going into April and I need to kind of shelve this for a moment, come back to it. I don't know when I may come back to it, maybe when it makes sense in July perhaps, or even in November, considering Mia Ballard is Black Indigenous, and I think that some of that representation should be good as well within November, although that seems so far from now. Regardless, I still really do want to read this. It's just that it's a physical read, and it is a little flowery. There were some moments, if you love The Love Witch, I do think that you're going to appreciate this book. The Love Witch for me, while visually absolutely loved looking at that film, watching it, I was bored out of my mind. And that's not to negate anybody who loved. I know there's so many people and so many friends of mine who absolutely love that film. And I get it, like, you know, as far as like, you know, higher level type of idea of the movie is concerned. But I think that there's just far too much flowery language and acting and everything for me to truly like that movie. And I think that that's probably where Sugar is gonna go as well. But going into it with that mindset, I think that I'll be fine. I'm just interested. She already seemed extremely unhinged. And I kind of got sidetracked because she's taking tabs of acid. And I've not read a lot of novels with people taking LSD or acid. I've read, of course, a lot of novels regarding main characters who have drug-like issues, but not acid. So then I started watching the documentary that was on Netflix, I keep on forgetting the name of it. But it's a documentary on Netflix that has to do with mushrooms and LSD and everything. And I started watching it, and it's got like Carrie Fisher in it, which is crazy, and Anthony Bourdain. And then I got sidetracked from reading this, and I think it's also has to do with the flowery language. Like, I have to be in the mindset to go, okay, let's read some pretty language. I'm just not a pretty language type of person. I will read this though, because I am interested in learning where down the rabbit hole she ends up going, but it just didn't make it for me this month. And the back of this cover still is really making me lose it because it's just not centered. But yeah, so didn't get to sugar. However, I did finish the month off with a read the very last day, which in all honesty was perfect because it was Trans Visibility Day. And that was when I knocked out my trans femme read. I knew that I did not want to do this video, and I did not want to finish out my March reading without reading one of my trans femme novels, because it was so important of me to read trans femme during Women's History Month. I had just not picked up my next audiobook, and that's why I hadn't read it yet, but I'm glad that I did, and that was Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl. So the beginning of it kind of was a little slow for me because I was trying to get to know our character Paul, and at first he kind of just seemed flitty. I was like, okay, I get it. Like, you hoeing out. I get it. That's cool. Is that it? Is that all we doing? And I think once it got around, I want to say into 2/3 or halfway into the novel, it really picked up for me because I started to actually feel character development from Paul, rather than feeling like this whole book was just about his experiences shape-shifting and just messing around all over town and all of that. It takes place in 1993, which I had to remember that. And it brings up a lot of really deep conversations, especially by the end, about the AIDS epidemic, about drug use that was happening in San Francisco, and the sickness and illness that was going around with that, secret sex clubs and everything. It covers, especially the halfway point is where it really, really starts to take off in regards to depth and character development, in my opinion, and in a way that really made me want to have the physical copy of the book, to be honest. I think beforehand I was like, this is fine, and the second half really put it into 4-star territory for me. At least 3 and a half or something along those lines. It really went into that territory for me. It somehow talked through a lot of the 90s relationships, queer relationships, period. Trans, being a drag king or queen, being bisexual, lesbian, being femme lesbian, being butch lesbian, being political. I mean, all in the scope of the 90s and 93. Being a gay man, being butch gay, being trade, being femme. Like, it went through so many, because Paul themselves goes through so many different morphs and changes throughout his life as he's moving through all of these different spaces. And I thought that was extremely interesting, especially even his best friend, who is supposed to be a lesbian, but I think reading her character, I felt more like she was bisexual because she was in love with Paul, who was her best friend, and in a lot of different ways was very jealous of Diane, who ended up being Paul's girlfriend when Paul was poly. And that was very interesting because, and I guess this is something as well that needs to, I want to learn more about and read about, because this is my own ignorance kind of stopping short, is the conversation of bisexuality during the 90s, during the 80s, during these spaces where queerness was very black and white. I think I was talking to somebody recently about the uptick in bisexual women and how many also Gen X women have come out as bisexual or queer or whatever, and that a lot of that has to do, my own mother, has come out. Like, when I realized my bisexuality, I remember talking to her about it and her coming to terms about her own sexuality through learning about mine and going, well, I've always felt like that. That's not how straight women feel. And going, no, they don't. Actually, I've talked to some and they don't think that way. And she's like, that's weird. So what does that make us? And I'm like, Ma, I think we're bisexual. You know, like it's so being a bisexual woman in a society where women are sexualized so much, and even straight women are sexualized to be with other straight women for the gaze of a man. Being a bisexual femme is something that feels like it's on the low ranking of being queer, and also is such uncharted territory in the conversations of language and also realization. For a very long time, I had rationalized my queerness with the idea of, well, I've got eyes, of course she looks fine, of course she's sexy, of course I would want to sleep with her. Does no one else see her? And being like, isn't that how everybody thinks? And it's not. And at least not in the space that I was. And I think that, like, his friend who is in love with him as in his masculine body, but also is very much also into women, I think that it's a conversation of, during the 90s, did bisexual femmes exist? And not in the sense that they exist, but again, going back to what I was talking about during Girl Interrupted, did we have the language to really talk through it? To really realize that that's what it was. And now, you know, as people sit there and they go, there's so many people, like, gay is catching, blah, or whatever. It's like, no, people actually have the language to sort through what to classify or identify themselves at, and now are like, oh, well then if that's the case, then yeah, I'm queer. And again, talking about it in spectrums instead of absolutes, which during that time, of course, considering the subjugation of what society was going to be towards you, never mind the fact of the fear because of the AIDS epidemic and everything that was going on, at the end of the day, unless you were like, no, I'm clear, black and white, like, I'm queer, I'm gay, you were like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to sit here and accept that about myself, for many different survival reasons. So I really enjoyed it. I really also want the physical copy because there's a monologue when he's also tripping on acid where he talks about the how rock and roll is inherently, as a music genre, queer, period. And that there's so many different things and rules that happen in rock and roll covers, in when women do covers of male songs, how they don't change pronouns and how no one bats an eye at it. And and what does that mean? Why does nobody, like, feel like, you know, Stevie Nicks needs to change the pronouns in a song, or even having a name like Stevie Nicks in the first place, and the gender fluidity that comes with that? And of course you have artists like Sylvester, or the inherent queerness of Prince, regardless of what his actual orientation may have been, what his representation as a person, as an artist represented, what that was, what, you know, so many different artists within rock and roll represented, and how rock and roll as a genre, even as metal as you may be, or punk rock as you may be, how even in that space there's a queerness to that space. And I was in love with that monologue, and I feel like I really want the physical copy, simply to have the physical copy of that monologue in my library, because it was absolutely amazing. And I think I also want to do, like, even a video recommendation based off of that. So I loved it. I think that I'm going to probably rate it, I don't know if it's a full 4 for me. A 3.5 still feels low, and I know 3 3/4 are becoming my new favorite number to rate things at, but I do feel like it sits in that space just because the first half wasn't really blowing me away, but the second half really, really did. And just the experience of being, not having to label yourself or anything, and not in a really hokey way, but just the freeness and just existing is sometimes a huge relief, to not have to tell anybody what it is or what you subscribe to or what explain anything, but just existing is so freeing, that in our society none of us are ever at privilege to do, really. And that's what I got out of the ending as well, which I thought was really moving. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was a great way to end my month for sure. And I'm glad that I also read it on Trans Visibility Day. I'm glad that I put some trans femme. Like, it wasn't a horror, and I think speculative fiction, maybe because of the shape-shifting and everything, but it really was just an amazing novel, and I can't recommend it enough. I think that it's just, I do feel like that first half is inevitably slow, but once you hit around Iowa, which when you start reading it, you'll know when you've hit it. Once you hit around Iowa, you're like, oh, whoa, this is crazy. This is really good. I really got involved around that area where Paul was Polly and was dating Diane, and they were in Westland, I think. I don't know. It was in some space, but it was in the Midwest, and it was very interesting. And I don't think that I've read anything really much like it before. So I really, really enjoyed it and can't recommend it enough. That is the end of today's wrap up. As per usual, it's always long, but I am happy to say I got under an hour as I'm looking at this clock. And by the time I take out a couple of oohs and ahs and ums, I should be maybe, I'm not even going to put that on myself, but I'll stay under an hour. As I said, this month really, it was a good reading month. It was just weird reading wise, like just reading period felt weird. But as far as the books that I read, I don't see, even though Dearest was kind of a weird one for me, I don't know. We'll see, like, by next year if I've read anything that's blown me away further for me to, like, get rid of that book. But to be honest, even that, it was like the last quarter let me down, and that was it. Other than that, everything else I read this month really was amazing and hard, but beautifully so. And I'm excited to be going into this next month where it'll just be a little lighter. It'll be a little bit lighter in the topics, though. You know, sometimes having, you know, the breather is great. You know, the way that I organize my year with my TBR, I read a lot of horror and a lot of fiction that has to do with societal issues and everything, because that's just the way that I love to analyze it. It's easier for me to do so, and it's far more interesting for me to do so. And I think March is always my hardest month because of obvious reasons, and especially with everything going on in the world right now, it was a hard month to read about femmes. But at the same time, all of these, for the most part, like, I mean, not even for the most part, all of these books in one way or another were extremely, extremely moving for me. So I would recommend everything I read this month. Regardless of how it may have felt in the end or my overall consent on it, I would absolutely recommend everything that I read this month. And I don't know how Sugar is going to end, but based off of the beginning, I'm like, oh, okay, it's one of those novels. So not everything was sad, but I didn't even finish that one. Because we're in April, and it's a lighter month, and I'm participating in Old School April, so we've got nostalgia everywhere. The other thing is too, halfway to Halloween is coming up at the end of this month, so that means Halloween hunting is creeping up on us, and I'm starting to see it in the stores, y'all. So if you enjoyed today's video, please give me a like. I really appreciate it. And also give me a follow and subscribe down below if you like today's video. Regardless of the Halloween and the holiday that'll be coming in soon, so there'll be more art around here, there is still going to be plenty of book talks and book wrap-ups and recommendations and everything. Those have been really fun for me, and I really have plans to do more recommendation videos, just because it was a lot of fun to do that that earlier one at the end of March, and I have some plans and some ideas for some other ones. So please subscribe down below. I'd really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye!